It's a Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Marvin Bagley has joined Memphis. What are they going to do with the young big? Plus, the Grizzlies have a rookie conundrum. Jaylen Wells, Zack Edey. What are their roles now as the team gets healthier? And we'll preview Grizzlies Suns from the Valley of the Sun. All that and more coming up on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for being with us on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole. He is of the Memphis Grizzlies beat writing job over at the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm a contributor for Grizzlead. I also write for our newsletter here at Locked On Grizzlies. Been covering the Grizzlies for over a decade. Between Damichael and I, you have most certainly come to the right place for Memphis Grizzlies content. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast. Make Locked On Grizzlies a part of your daily NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. And we have a free daily newsletter now that you can go and check out over at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com. Words from me on the Memphis Grizzlies just about every day, plus NBA analysis, plus fantasy basketball advice, and so much more. So again, lockedondaily.com. Go and subscribe to our free daily newsletter right now. That's lockedondaily.com and click on the Memphis Grizzlies tab. Damichael, a lot of comments on YouTube about our conversation from yesterday's show. I appreciate folks spending so much time on the page, but we have to turn the page, right? There's a basketball game tonight. They are having a back-to-back to close out the pre-All-Star slate, and it's two winnable games against, compared to the Thunder, everything's a winnable game, really. But two teams that are not the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Memphis Grizzlies, as I mentioned earlier, are as close to healthy as they have been perhaps in 2 years, Damichael, which is really impressive to look at that injury report, at least since, late 2023. This is the most healthy they've been. But let's lead off with the newest Memphis Grizzly, Marvin Bagley III. The official injury diagnosis is that he is, in terms of his availability, he's with the team, but he is not available. He is out for tonight's game. It's an ankle sprain. That there's all sorts of words that I'm not going to try to say in there. Distal syndesmosis. That's not terrible. But he's out, right? Adjusting. Johnny Davis is not with the team. We'll see what happens with him. But Bagley has been talked about by Taylor Jenkins in terms of potentially being a depth big for this team. Obviously, Bagley comes with a lot of baggage. He was now infamous for being the choice of the Sacramento Kings, I believe, at number 2 overall in the Luka Doncic draft. It's pretty funny to look back on that draft, and only 2 players from the top 10, if I'm correct, are still with the teams that selected them or acquired them, in the case of Trae Young, on draft day. And only one of them was actually originally drafted by the team that they're still with, and that's Jaren Jackson Jr. So Marvin Bagley III gets drafted a couple picks ahead of Jaren in that draft, now a teammate of Jaren Jackson Jr. Certainly not the NBA career he's wanted so far, but there's no denying that there's talent there. How do you perceive Bagley fitting in with this Grizzlies team? Is he strictly going to be an end-of-bench big break in case of emergency, or is there something there that Memphis can maybe develop over the next year or so?
Yeah, I'm okay with this acquisition, especially considering that the rotation in Memphis is settled for the most part at this point. It is what it is, but I would like to think of him as, we've kind of used this analogy before, but as like that change of pace running back, as that other bullpen option when you got a bunch of hard throwing guys and a guy that, comes in and throws, a different speed, different arm slot angle, or whatever the case may be. That can be Marvin Bagley. Let's split the hairs here with the front court. Take Marvin Bagley out the equation. What you got is, when you talk about the size factor, like who meets the criteria of what you want in the front court size. You got Jaren Jackson Jr., you got Zack Edey, you got Jay Huff. Who meets the criteria from defensively what you want? I think you got Brandon Clark, you got Jaren Jackson Jr., Jay Huff in certain parts of his games, but all around defender. At least the advanced stats, you can attest to that, Joe. They're not the greatest of fans of Jay Huff, and Zack Edey is still making some adjustments on the defensive end to the point where we'll talk about him a little bit more later in the show. So the point that being here that I'm getting to, and even if you want to throw Santi Aldama into this equation as well, there's one big on the Grizzlies roster that I think you trust on both ends of the basketball, and that's Jaren Jackson Jr. And you want to go a step further and want to talk about the physicality standpoint of it. I think there are 2, maybe 3 guys that you trust on the physicality standpoint. That's Jaren Jackson Jr., that's Zack Edey, and that's Brandon Clark. Jaren Jackson Jr., he's going to play. So the point here is we've seen in cases where Santi will struggle against some of the more physical teams from time to time, but Santi's going to play. Like, it is what it is. The difference maker is sometimes Brandon Clark will struggle more so with the size of those teams when you're going against some of the bigger guys. I think Marvin Bagley presents you another option where he can match up from a physicality standpoint. Like, this is a gifted player at the end of the day. Whether he puts it all together, all that, we'll see. But he's gifted. This is a guy who was a 5-star rated recruit. He was a top pick for a reason because he has those, kind of physical attributes that the Grizzlies need, like from a physicality imposing standpoint in the paint. He meets the, I guess, quote unquote, eye test. Another thing that really stands out to me when you talk about what can Marvin Bagley really bring to this team. And Jaren, over the course of his career, right now, this season, he's at a 16% defensive rebound percentage. Offensive rebounding percentage for his career, he's at 5.1%. This year, he's at 5.2. I pointed out Jaren because Jaren is the one guy who's going to play a lot. And I think it is of the utmost importance to have a quality or semi-decent rebounder aside of him as much as possible. In the case of Marvin Bagley, you kind of get that. Over the course of his career, this guy has pretty much averaged over 7 rebounds per game, almost at every stop. And he's done that pretty much by playing he's never played more than 30 minutes per game. And when you go to those defensive rebound percentage numbers that I just mentioned, you talk about a guy for his career, 21% defensive rebound percentage. We just talked about Jaren being hovering around 15%. The offensive rebound percentage was going to stand out to you, though, Joe. 10.8% offensive rebound percentage, pretty much twice. Actually, not pretty much. Actually, it's twice as much as what you get from Jaren Jackson Jr. So think about those times when you were playing the Los Angeles Lakers. And, I think Zack Edey went out of the game. Brandon Clark, the size wasn't, a factor. Like, he couldn't be a factor as much. And you turned to Jay Huff and things didn't work out. Now you got another option who, from a physicality standpoint, can match the eye test, and he can score a little bit. Like, over the course of Marvin Bagley's career, he's been able to score. Now, efficiency is going to be a question. He's 52% from the field as a big, which is okay. It's not terrible. But at the same time, this is a guy who has averaged 12.4 points per game over the course of his career in 23 minutes. So, I'm okay with the Flyer. Like, he is a different type of big than what they have. And I think that alone helps out in this equation. He's not going to be some overall like difference maker from a title contending perspective, but he is that change of pace option that the Grizzlies can use if Brandon Clark isn't working, if Jay Huff isn't working, or if there's an injury.
Marvin Bagley is a lot closer to Zaire Williams than he is anything else at the moment. You mentioned the 5-star recruit coming out of high school. So is Zaire.
He averaged double figures. Come on. He averaged
sure
double figures.
Yeah, so did I in my church league. I think that the thing with Bagley is it has to be a very specific role, right? He's not going to be a featured guy. You can't look at him as someone – he was picked 2nd overall. This is supposed to be a franchise player, a star. He's not that. Okay, he's almost 26 years old. That's not what he's going to be in the NBA. If he's willing to humble himself a little bit, and by all indications he has essentially, I think that you put him in the dunker spot. You essentially give him a role that's similar to that of Brandon Clark. He's a bigger, less good Brandon Clark. You let him be that finisher at the rim. If you put him on the high block and give him to him like he's LaMarcus Aldridge and you expect him to make some moves and hit some mid-range jumpers, that's where he's going to get inefficient. He has to be very specific in what he does offensively. I could see him and Ja pairing really nicely together in terms of being a guy that can finish at the rim, have a little bit more control of his body in terms of being a solid screener. If he's willing to take on that Edey role almost, I'm not advocating for replacing Edey, but if he can do similar things to Edey, I think that maybe it's a night like what happened against the Thunder where Taylor Jenkins decides that Edey doesn't have it. Bagley can get some opportunity there. And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. The energizer part of his game is something that I think will stand out for him as well. And I think we didn't mention it too. I wanted to make sure I mentioned it before we moved on. The fact that they're not going to have him before the All-Star break. Like he's not that, right. And that's planned. I want to make sure the listeners know that like he's not going to play before the All-Star break because the Grizzlies have this different type of system that they want to get him incorporated in. But yeah, I think that alone kind of tells us that they're very intentional about the idea of using him at some point.
And he could theoretically, I think he's on a 1 year, $12.5 million contract, something along those lines. Theoretically could be another cheap guy to come back and provide some rotational depth, end of rotation depth, if things work out. Like you mentioned, it's worth a flyer. I think that you could certainly do worse in terms of a guy at the end of your rotation. Let Damichael and I know how you guys are feeling about Marvin Bagley at Damichael C on X for Damichael, at Joe Mullinax for me. A couple of you guys hit us up on X yesterday after our Monday show. Thank you so much for that. Please continue to do so and continue to chat in the comments as long as you're nice to each other, right? We don't need to have 40 comment threads where you're being sarcastic and not very kind. Just be nice, right? Kindness. You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, my grandmother used to say. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I mentioned Zack Edy a moment ago, Jaylen Wells, two rookies that I don't know if it's the rookie wall or whatever the case might be, hit or miss in terms of productivity. The Grizzlies are as healthy as they've been in a long time. What do their roles look like moving forward? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Open Phone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where Open Phone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. For just $15 a month, the cost of a few coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second that you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messengers are set directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, Open Phone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Go check out Open Phone right now. So, Damichael, we talked about Zack Edey in the previous segment with Marvin Bagley's arrival.
Yeah.
And, it's a balancing act here because it's going to sound like we're criticizing two rookies that have been a big part of the Grizzlies' success. I mean, you're heading out to the Bay Area again, this time covering All-Star Weekend, and two Memphis Grizzlies players are on the same team over at All-Star Weekend as part of the Rising Stars Challenge, Zach Edey, Jaylen Wells. Two guys that are probably going to be first-team All-NBA rookie, right? However, how many teams in the history of the National Basketball Association that consider themselves championship contenders have started two rookies?
Yeah.
I haven't researched it, but I'm guessing you can count them on one hand, if that much. So Wells has hit a bit of a wall. Zach Edey is inconsistent in his productivity. Looking at this team now with Vince Williams Jr. fully back, with Gigi Jackson back in the fold completely, how do you foresee the roles of these rookies changing? Do they stay starters? I advocated on X, and you and I are on the same train with this guy, so I think you probably agree with me. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I know where you're going.
I think that the move is you start Edey just because, again, you could play him 20 to 25 minutes. You just start him next to Jaren because he's the best screener in theory because of his size for Ja. I think it's Vince Williams Jr. that becomes the starting wing, and I think Jaylen Wells goes to be a reserve. Doesn't mean he doesn't play, but I do think that Vince Williams Jr. at full tilt gives Memphis what they need. To Zach Kleiman's point, like we talked about yesterday, one of the reasons Marcus Smart is no longer here is Vince Williams Jr. exists.
Exactly.
Right? So if Marcus Smart was going to be that guy, maybe it's time for Vince Williams Jr. to replace that role and relieve some of the stress off of the rookie Wells.
Yeah, let's peel this back a little bit because I want to touch on something that you said early on as well. And I think people are okay with this topic because at the end of the day, this is a topic that we're only allowed to have because they're pretty much healthy now. Like this you had to play these guys at certain points of the season. So now that you have a Vince Williams, a G.G. Jackson, a Marvin Bagley, and a Brandon Clark, all these guys are healthy to kind of factor into the equation here. You can kind of dive a little bit deeper into this. That's one part of it. And then two, a lot of people wanted a trade at the deadline. I said I didn't see the ideal deal to have, but a lot of people wanted a trade, and
including Zach Kleiman.
yeah. And that's an important thing to note as well. And then now let's go to the Taylor Jenkins part of it. I thought that OKC game was telling it away, and there have been several other examples of this over the course of the season. And people can say what they want, they can feel how they want about it, but at the end of the day, there's that saying that everyone's heard at this point. It's actions speak louder than words. And there was a breakdown from a communication standpoint in the early third quarter. Jaylen Wells was guarding Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Zack Edey was supposed to be at the rim. Easy two-handed dunk. Shai Gilgeous hanging on the rim. Timeout, Grizzlies. Taylor Jenkins goes out to the court. Furious, looking back at the players, demanding something to them. Players go to the bench. A whole lot of communications going on. Jaylen Wells is talking to Desmond Bane. Zack Edy's trying to figure out what went wrong. Brandon Clark's talking. All these guys are engaged. And then a whole new lineup comes out there. And not a whole new lineup. The two rookies get replaced. That told me, Joe, he doesn't trust the rookies all the way yet. I think that's fair to say. He does not completely trust the rookies because he didn't just take them out for that stretch. They didn't play another minute against the number one seed in the Western Conference. To me, they're not ready for this game yet. Well, look, we know how good they can be. Like you said, Joe, we are high on these rookies. This is not an indictment to them. It's more so like, hey, look, like you said, how many teams start two rookies in the NBA on quote-unquote championship contender, so to speak? So kind of diving into the situation with each player. Let's start with Zack Edy because I think I saw, Joe, I saw a couple comments recently and it's from some of the listeners who kind of I think when Zack Edy was playing well, they were waiting to see what I would say about him playing well. And I didn't think I was too critical. I didn't think I was too critical of his play in January. I think I just called it how it is. The main thing that I said in January and the main frustration that I had in January was when I said, if the Grizzlies aren't going to use Zack Edy to his strengths, why did they draft him? That was the main thing that I said. Always felt like he could be this level of rebounder. Never lost fact in him being a physical, imposing, rebounder. He's been one of the better offensive rebounders, point blank, period. Not just for rookies, but just period. And he's shown that over the course of the month of February so far with the double doubles that he's racked up and whatnot. So I think with Zack Edey, it's going to be a similar role pretty much all the way through the rest of the season because there are physical things that there are limitations there. When he goes against certain teams, when they have those slithery guards who know how to attack him in certain matchups, guess what? Then you're going to need Brandon Clark. And if Brandon Clark isn't working, you still need a mobile big who has a little bit more size. Then you go to J Huff or Marvin Bagley. So you have other options in case of that. But I don't think it's going to be Zack Edey 30 minutes a night every single game because matchups matter, and matchups are going to be an indication of how much he's going to play. As with Jaylen Wells, you hit it on the money there with Vince Williams. That's a guy that me and you both have talked about, the idea of him playing much more. And even if the Grizzlies decide not to start Vince Williams, I think he's probably the closer. And the biggest difference, because you say, well, what's the biggest difference here? Jaylen Wells is a really good three-point shooter. So is Vince Williams Jr. Jaylen Wells has shown that he can be a very irritating defender. So has Vince Williams Jr. You know what the difference is? Vince Williams Jr., he gets real muddy on the glass. He can rebound at a high level, but the real difference between those two is the playmaking. It's the assist numbers. Vince Williams' first game back, all the way back in November, and in this first game played in February, he gets into the game, and the Grizzlies say, here you go. They throw the ball in his hands. He's bringing the ball up the floor. How many times we've seen Jaylen Wells play a lot of games this season? How many times have we seen Jaylen Wells bringing the ball up the floor, directing the offense? Not an indictment on him. It's just a normal thing for a rookie. I think it's very clear if you really break down Jaylen Wells' game. Jaylen Wells is solid as a rock. Love what he brings to the Grizzlies. The playmaking will be exposed against the best teams. That's if you're going against the Oklahoma Cities of the world, you're going to say, man, Ja can make some plays. Des can make some plays. Jaren can get downhill, make some plays. Let's see what this rookie's going to do off the dribble when we put him in a situation where he's shown he can score in those situations. I like what he has with the fadeaway, the turnaround shot, and whatnot. Vince Williams is one of the few guys who can nightly, if you give him the minutes, he can go double-digit points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. He showed that last season in the stretch where he got the extended playing time. I trust him more as a playmaker. Having that guy we talk about the secondary playmakers with Desmond Bane, that's kind of the difference. So even if it's not in the starting role, it's the closing role. So I think they have a good thing with Jaylen Wells and Vince Williams, but Vince Williams' role will increase as he gets healthier.
I think that there's a defensive versatility too, in addition to offensive versatility. Jaylen Wells has shown that ability to face guard. He's done a really good job with that, but that's limited. When you play somebody like SGA, Gilgeous-Alexander completely abused that, right? And when you're a face guard guy, it's harder to get over certain types of screens at different angles. You can be taken advantage of. Williams can play a more traditional style of pick and roll defense going under and over screens and not have that same disadvantage. So I think there's a lot of reasons to like Wells and Edey still, of course. I think they both still play. For sure. But I think, again, it's different now because it's not transactional. Are you trying to win a championship or not? You don't depend on rookies. You don't depend on rookies if you're trying to win a championship. And the Grizzlies, even after the Thunder loss, are still among the top 5 in the NBA. When you're a top 5 team in the NBA, you're a title contender. It might be the Thunder and Cavs and then everybody else, but Memphis is at the top of that everybody else list. Let Damichael and I know what you think about using Edey and Wells moving forward at Damichael C. at Joe Mullinax. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will preview Grizzlies Suns. Should be a good one. Make sure you're hanging around for it. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. So glad to have you with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. A bit of housekeeping here. Those of you that are everydayers, you know that I am very washed. I'm a very old person. Damichael, of course, has the day job, also night job, covering the very late starts for Grizzlies Suns, and then, of course, the final game before the All-Star break as well, out on the West Coast. The reason I'm saying all this is it's going to be a couple of days here, Wednesday, Thursday, kind of like last week, where the show probably won't go live early in the morning. It'll be a midday kind of thing. Might be Damichael, might be me, but just putting it on your radars. Every once in a while, people are like, where's the show? Why isn't it live yet? Because we need sleep, right? We're human beings. And I am more washed than Damichael, admittedly. So there will be shows this week. Just be patient with us over the next couple days with these late nights. The first late night is tonight. Grizzlies Suns, a very interesting game. Bradley Beal is out for Phoenix. That probably helps the Grizzlies, helps the Suns. It does not help the Grizzlies because Bradley Beal has struggled this season. Kevin Durant is not on the injury list, so that likely means he is full tilt available, which does not help Memphis and certainly helps Phoenix. We mentioned how the Grizzlies are as healthy as they've been in some time. What are some of your keys for this game, Damichael? Because for me, you can lose to the Thunder, right? You obviously don't want to get blown out, but the Thunder are really freaking good. If you want to go into the All-Star break feeling pretty good about yourself, you have to at least split this West Coast trip if you can't get both of them. Tonight is probably the more realistic game considering how good the Clippers have been of late. How does Memphis blitz the Suns and get out of Phoenix with a win?
Yeah, this is a game that the Grizzlies, at least on paper, they should win. The Suns they aren't one of the more physical teams in the West. We talk about how the physical teams are the ones who give the Grizzlies trouble. The Suns are a bottom third of the NBA ranked defense. This is a game the Grizzlies' free-flowing offense should thrive in. And this is a game that and there's a certain player on your team that knows that it goes through him, and that's Jaren Jackson Jr. There haven't been a lot of more players in the NBA who've been more dominant against the Suns over the last year or so. And again, I keep saying he knows it. We talked about it before the last game. They played the Suns. They played the Suns, and what did he do? He put up 38 points in a game, had 12 boards. If you go back to the game right before that one, which would be last January, he had 28 points and 10 rebounds in that game. If you go back to the game right before that one, a month earlier, December 2023, you go back to that game, 37 points, 9 rebounds. So last 3 games for Jaren Jackson Jr. against Phoenix, 37 points, 28 points, 38 points. Now look, a little bit different dynamic for the Suns. Like they got Nick Richards instead of Nurkic, right? So a guy who can move a little bit better. But at the same time, he's going to be playing the 5. That's what we talk about, the Zack Edy factor. That's probably, when we talk about Zack Edy, that's maybe the best part about having him in the lineup is in where he helps Jaren the most. With Brandon Clark, you can say, okay, Kevin Durant, go get Brandon Clark. With Zack Edy, you're not saying Kevin Durant, go get Zack Edy. Kevin Durant's got to deal with Jaren Jackson Jr. Kevin Durant can't guard Jaren Jackson Jr. This ain't me just saying it. Go look at the film. Go look at the last 3 times. That man is begging for help when Jaren Jackson Jr. is isolated against him. He's bigger, he's stronger, and Jaren knows that he has the advantage in these matchups. This game's got to go through Jaren. If Jaren has a bad game and it's 25 shots and you lose, man, chalk it up. It happens. But at the same time, he's got to be the guy who's setting the tone in this one for me. But this is a game, too, for Ja Morant to really get some things going as well. The Suns, they're solid. But, again, this is not a really good defensive team. They don't have, really scary interior defenders, so to speak. They don't have, those great point of attack guys that some of the more recent Grizzlies opponents that have slowed down Ja have. So this is a game, to get Ja going back in the right direction as well. I think the offense of the Grizzlies can really do some good things in this game. They should. I'd be surprised if they scored less than 120. It should be a free-flowing game for them. The thing is, you got to slow down the Suns. And with Grayson Allen being probable to play, he's most likely going to play. Kevin Durant being into the fold. Royce O'Neal is having one of the better years of his career shooting the three-point ball this year. They got a lot of firepower on offense, and I didn't even get to Tyus Jones yet as well. So a lot of firepower offensively from that team. They can get hot. They can shoot it. It's going to come down to Jaren Jackson Jr. and what the Grizzlies are going to do on the defensive end.
Have to make Kevin Durant work defensively. Have to. He's coming off of injury. He's healthy, but you have to make him as he gets older, especially. He's probably the most perfect offensive weapon in the history of the NBA in terms of his frame, the way that he scores the ball. He's a blast to watch, even at the twilight, approaching the twilight of his career. Here is the bench against the Denver Nuggets. And again, admittedly, Durant did not play for Phoenix the last time they were out against Denver. You're talking about 33 minutes for Bol, Damian Lee with 16 minutes, Ty Washington Jr. With 21 minutes off the bench, Monty Morris, 14 minutes. The point that I'm trying to make, Mason Plumlee, this is not a particularly deep Phoenix Suns team, which shouldn't surprise us considering the way that the team's been built, right? It's been built around Booker, built around Durant, built around Bradley Beal, and then whatever pieces they're able to fit around those guys. A player like Ryan Dunn is a really impressive defender, right? That's going to be interesting to see if he does get the start, how they put him, how they use him as that defensive weapon. Who comes out? I would imagine Dunn probably comes out and Durant's the starter. You keep O'Neal and Richards in the lineup. But how they deploy these guys and how the Grizzlies bench, now that they are at full strength, we're talking about Luke Kennard, Vince Williams Jr., G.G. Jackson, Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark. You are the deeper basketball team. This has to be a game where the starters at least play even, if not a little bit, and then your bench wins it. That is my opinion. Because Durant and Booker, again, without Beal out there to have to try to appease, they're going to be able to cook a little bit. You got to tip your cap to two really good offensive players. they don't have the bench that Memphis does. This is one of those times where the depth of the Grizzlies is going to pay off.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, especially considering it's the first leg of a back-to-back. I always say if you have the opportunity to kind of put a team away, early on the first leg of back-to-back, you got to go for it. If you go up double digits at halftime, try to go up 20 plus at the end of 3 quarters so you can have that extra oomph if you go into that game, against the Clippers, which we know is going to be physical, it's going to be muddy. You're going to need as many of the guys available as you can have for that one. And these next 2 games are going to be completely opposite from a kind of style perspective and how the Suns play and how the Clippers play.
Phoenix is a much more favorable matchup. There's no denying that. This is the game for the Grizzlies to knock out if they are going to win one of these 2 games out west before the All-Star break. Make sure you're hitting Damichael and I up on X. Let us know what your keys to the game are. Let us know in the comments as well. On our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, again, may not be a 5 a.m., 6 a.m. kind of situation, but it will come out on Wednesday. It'll be Damichael or myself talking about Grizzlies Suns and also previewing Grizzlies Clippers. Again, 2 very different matchups, 2 different styles, and obviously 2 different forms of team building, 2 different types of coaching. You put it really well there, partner. An interesting back-to-back because it's 2 very different styles of play for the Suns and the Clippers.
Yeah, and it's a telling one, right? We feel like we have a good idea of how this Grizzlies team, one plays against good teams, how they play against the more finesse style teams, how they play against the physical teams. I still think this part of the season is a little bit early based on the schedule. We talk about the fact that they have one of the toughest schedules remaining. It's because they had one of the easier schedules in the first half of the season. So we're about to get a bigger sample size of how they match up against these teams, whether they're finesse, physical, and just straight up good. And I think it's going to be really telling. And this is a good little combination right before the break. Like, we have an idea. We feel like this is the type of games when they play teams like the Suns, they go for 120, 130. Let's see if that actually plays out that way. We feel like the games against the Clippers, that's one where they probably score a little bit less. But, Zubac, and we'll talk about that. But those teams tend to be a handful for them. We'll see if that tends to play out that way as well. So really important stretch here right before you go into the break. And the guys seem like they're, talking to the players, there's no sense that they're taking their foot off the pedal heading into these last couple games before the little break.
Make sure you're joining us for our Wednesday edition of the show, and make sure you are liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make Damichael and myself a part of your everyday NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Make sure you're with us each and every time that an episode drops. Make sure you're checking out our free daily newsletter, LockedOnDaily.com. Not just words from me on the Grizzlies every day, but NBA analysis, fantasy basketball advice, and so much more. LockedOnDaily.com. Click on the Grizzlies tab and subscribe to our free daily newsletter. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Click on the Locked On Grizzlies tab. It is a free daily newsletter. Grizzlies words from me sent to your inbox just about every day. For Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. Lots of basketball to talk about to close out the pre-All-Star slate. Looking forward to it. Hopefully you are as well. Until next time, stay locked in. We'll catch you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Grizzlies. See you.